Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tickell. Today's conversation reaches into that tender place we all know, the one that asks, what if my sense of disconnection isn't because, I don't know, something is wrong with me, but because I've forgotten how to listen? And if you've ever looked out into the world, all of the chaos and the exhaustion and the noise, and thought there has to be a better way to live, this episode is for you. Because today I'm joined by Rebecca Tekell, a filmmaker, a storyteller, and a regenerative visionary who holds lives at the crossroads of activism and surrender. Someone who knows what it means to both fight for the earth and be softened by her. And probably somebody you know. Once we get into her list of films, I am sure you have probably either heard of or at least watched one of them. So today we're going to explore what happens when we stop trying to save the planet and start remembering that she's already speaking, already guiding us home. Rebecca and I talk about deep grief of disconnection, that quiet ache that is just so many of us carry. And also that hum of fear, that deep, deep down fear that just happens to be there, and how it begins to heal the moment we stop seeing ourselves as separate from the living world. We explore what it means to trust the intelligence that moves through the soil, through breath, through our own bodies, and we remember that sometimes the most radical act is not to do more, but to listen deeper. You'll hear us speak about the way plants and landscapes mirror our internal transformations and how regeneration begins not only in the soil, but in the soul, and about how the future we long for, one of balance and kinship and reverence, starts with remembering that we were never meant to walk alone. So, if you're feeling a little weary or uncertain and about how to live in harmony in a world that often feels like it's forgotten itself, let this episode be a soft hand. Let this episode be what holds you and keeps you safe and reminds you that you're not separate, you're not behind, you're part of a much larger conversation that's been happening all along. Welcome to episode 135. It was never just me and trees. How nature speaks through us with Rebecca Tekell. Welcome to Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tickell, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. For over a decade, I've been known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, working closely with plants to share their practical wisdom to help you consciously embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In this podcast, I delve into ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways of plants. Together, we'll explore how ecosystem thinking helps you overcome limiting beliefs, understand the true nature of relationships, and live an authentic, impactful life. Rebecca, I'm actually, I have to admit, I'm a little stargazy and really excited to have this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it since the first time we jumped on the call. And so, but before we start and I start tumbling out with the billions of questions that are running through my head already, can you tell everybody, who is Rebecca? Do you like to go by Tickell? Is it Tickell? Like Tickell?
Well, Tekell.
Tekell. I just like Tickell better. Tickell is so
Okay,
much better.
I like to tickle people's consciousness, so either one.
Oh, nice. Okay, so Rebecca Tekell, tell everyone before I start gushing over you.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Tekell. I am an activist. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a mom. I'm a regenerative farmer. I started off as a young person in Hollywood and show business. I starred in a Christmas movie classic called Prancer with Sam Elliott, and that taught me that films really can reach the world and make a difference. And then I came out to Hollywood and I was in a bunch of horror movies, and then I realized I want to use storytelling to heal the planet. And so for the last 2 decades, I've made over 20 films. The first film that I produced was called Fuel, and that won the Audience Award at Sundance back in 2008. And since then, it's been a very long journey of environmental activism and documentary filmmaking that led eventually to making Kiss the Ground and then Common Ground, which are about regenerative agriculture and have reached billions of people and have helped to reshape the way that the world thinks about agriculture. And a recent film called Be Wild, and then another movie I made called The Earthing Movie, which I really love, which is on YouTube, which is about how not only can we heal the earth, but the earth can heal us. And so all of the films that I make and my work and my purpose in life is to wake people up to the power of regeneration, to get 1 billion acres into transition to regeneration globally, and to connect and restore our love of nature.
I love it. I love it all. So I first became familiar with your work with Kiss the Ground, like many others, that was kind of like the foray into the work that you're doing. And as you said, one of the things I love is that premise, that storytelling, and especially that storytelling through film, just has a way of cutting through all of that red tape. All of the fears about the science behind it, and all these different aspects. When a person, I mean, we are a visual. Vision is our top sense as human beings. So the idea of vision with an immersive like soundtrack with all those things just moves so much of the consciousness. So it makes sense to me. I'm curious as to how you ended up in environmental activism. Like, here you go from acting. I can get why you go from acting to producing, especially after a horror film stint. I mean, come on. But like, how do you end up in environmental activism rather than, Hollywood films of other genres?
I grew up in Vermont in the middle of nowhere on 100 acres of land. So I was really lucky to spend most of my childhood in nature. And I spent most of that time alone in the woods. And so when I was a kid, my conversations were with the trees. And,
Yes.
um, I really learned how to listen to nature and how to revere nature. And I saw the power of nature when we would have these huge ice storms and we'd get cut off from the rest of the world. And then just the seasons of nature and the feeling of all the changes of what the weather brings. Plus, I come from a legacy farming family. So I can count many generations back in my family of farming. And so it's in my blood, that connection to growing food and to being a steward of the land. However, in my family, they got sucked into the Green Revolution. So my father used to stand in vats of DDT and 2,4-D to clean them out, and then he would spray them on the field, and then he would get out of school at the age of 12 to go home and plow the field. So, and they got out of tilling because of the Green Revolution and they started no till. But unfortunately, with that came the introduction of these chemical inputs onto the farm. And with that became the deterioration of health in my family. And I've witnessed how these chemicals can affect people and the illnesses that they can cause firsthand with people that I love. So I think all of that combined with being 26 years old and sitting in a theater in Los Angeles at the end of my acting career, wondering what I was going to do next, watching An Inconvenient Truth
Mm-hmm.
and realizing this is what my life is about. Because I didn't feel hopeful at the end of that movie. I felt doomed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not my nature. My nature is if there's a problem, then there's a solution. So um, that became my personal mission at that point was like, how am I going to tell stories that are going to look at the pathway for how we can solve this problem versus trying to fix it with like a paper straw or a light bulb? Like that wasn't logically, I knew that that was not the answer. And, for the last, since 2006, that's nearly 20 years, it's been paralysis around climate change. And it's
Right.
because there hasn't been really any clear focus on what the path forward could be of how we could actually take that teraton of carbon and put it somewhere because no amount of reducing emissions will do anything about the teraton of carbon that we've emitted. There has to be some place for it to go. Reducing emissions may slow down the rate of increase of carbon in our atmosphere, but it's not going, I mean, we're not even at sustainable right now. This is the
Right.
way I view it. Sustainable, which is not a good path because we're on a path towards desertification and destruction, and then degeneration, and then regeneration. So what we need is regeneration. I think as soon as I saw that film, given my love of nature, given the access in Hollywood and the people that I knew, and the way I know stories can change the world, I was just crystal clear that that was my path, that I needed to start telling stories about nature and looking for solutions. And so that's been the theme for the last 20 years.
I really love the fact that you touched on, which is so important, is the aspect that films can't be just doom and gloom because people then walk out of them feeling hopeless. And when you're
Mhm,
hopeless, you just go home and you self-soothe,
mhm,
right? The disconnection becomes even wider. The idea that I am disconnected from nature, that trauma comes up, the fear comes up, and you just feel like there's nothing you can do about it. And so, why the hell even try? And at that point, you yourself don't even take care of things that you know you can do in your own life because you're like, why do it when they're just telling me that it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket anyway? So, let that go. And I really enjoyed that was an influence for you of saying that's not what I want to do. I don't want to create that. I'm gonna there's like 3 or 4 points that you touched on that I want to, but I'm gonna go back a little bit because I want to hear about this communication with trees. Like I
yes.
want to, I especially want to hear me out for 1 second because in all the people that I have spoken to, even staunch people, like people who love the environment in general, there is still a kind of different breed, permit me for using that term for a second, between those that have a love of nature because of resources and climate change and ecosystem services and everything that is there, which is kind of where I started my world. I mean, I was in biomimicry and I was thinking about doing the right thing. It's kind of like, and then there's the other side of it that is, I have this deep relationship with the beings of nature that I want to bring in to the conversation that we're having in some ways. Now, in some, it's getting easier and easier to say I talk to trees and people being like, what did they say? And tell me everything. And I want to know more, luckily. But that's only been recently in the last few years where that's come to that place.
Mm,
I'm really curious as to how you bring those beings of nature that you have had such a deep relationships with into your work. Like, is it
mhm.
a conscious thing? Do you have a practice? Or is it more just, it's such a part of you that you almost don't feel? Walk me through it.
For me, I can get very much in my head and I can think through things, and my ideas aren't always the best, if I'm honest. And I think the best work that I do aren't my ideas. And I know that that sounds strange, but for me, um, when I'm able to get out of my thoughts, and the way I love to do it is I have this tree, and there's clover all around it. And so when I get into my head and I'm stuck, I just go and I lay down in the clover under the tree and I sort of surrender myself to the earth. And there is a science behind that. There
Mm-hmm.
is the actual science of earthing, which is what I made the earthing movie about, which is that electron charge. I mean, that's how science describes it. Science describes it and has proven with tons of peer reviewed studies that when you actually touch the earth, your body gets an electron charge from the earth, and that thins your blood viscosity. It lowers your heart rate. It lowers your cortisol levels. It starts to balance your hormones. And if you watch the Earthing movie, you'll see all of these before and after photos of what happens to your body after 15 minutes of being connected to the earth. And it reduces inflammation in your body. And inflammation is what is the source of most disease. And there's more to it than just reducing inflammation in your body, I think. It's not just that you're getting an electron charge, in my opinion, because I think science can only see so much of what that is. And I'm curious about what that is, and I have my own intuition of what that is, but when I'm laying in that clover and I'm receiving that electron charge from the earth, which is how we're meant to be, by the way. Like, we come from the earth. We are electrical. And we need that electron charge to live because we're supposed to be in balance with the same. We're supposed to have constantly that electron charge. I mean, indigenous people knew to cover themselves in mud when they were ill that the earth heals. And they've done all of these tests of people who are earthing and people who weren't. But I don't think that actually captures the whole essence of what that is. And so when I lay on the earth, It more for me is like in the movie Avatar when they take their hair and they plug it into the earth and then they get that wisdom from the earth. And to me, that's how the trees speak to me is it's more than an electron charge. It's like being connected to all of it. And when I allow myself to be connected to all of it and I'm getting that charge from the earth of whatever that is, and I clear my mind and I stop trying to control everything, sometimes I just get hit in the head with whatever the thing is, like when I'm not even expecting it. And so the best things that I've done, the things that have most resonated, they hit me like that. And it's usually because of those conversations with the trees where I allowed the information to come through versus trying to control it, figure it out, solve it, fix it.
Right. That's yeah, perfect. Because you know that there's a lot of people who think that Avatar was based on my community because the original writer was an Italian, so they think it was based on Dom and Her, on where I
Mhm.
live. Because we do have a lot of practices that are very similar. We do have a mother tree, Diamantel, who is like the tree of our Sacred Woods Temple, and so there's many similar. Obviously, we don't have all that flying, which I would like. Or the giant, being giant and blue. I mean, blue is one of our colors, but being giant and blue, no. But we do have a lot of similarities in a lot of other
Astral
aspects.
projection, y'all.
It's
You know.
exactly so. We do a lot of that too. So I'm okay with people thinking that Avatar is based on Dom and Her. I'm good with that. Um, but I love what you said because you've touched on kind of the way that I also approach things, which is this mix of understanding the science that has already been understood, because we know that science only can know so much. There are a lot of things that we don't yet have tests for. We don't really know how to read. I mean, from a Dominarian perspective, and the way that we look at things, and the work that I've done with plants very closely, is that electrical connection taps into our aura, which is really an electromagnetic field, right, all around us. It has our subtle bodies, which are the layers that make up the aura, where our soul hosts all of our talents and our skills. I've been working with this little plant right here for many years on awakening my subtle body of imagination. And for me, with this plant, who does not speak also in words, it's about movement. And it's the more that I move my body, the more that I allow myself to process through that motion. That's when everything kind of starts to make sense, because as my subtle body taps into that electromagnetic field, and I'm almost always barefoot. I hate shoes. It's now that we're getting close to winter, I try my hardest not to even wear socks. Most of my shoes are barefoot shoes, including my hiking boots. They're barefoot
Mhm.
hiking boots, so they're really like thin soled, very like almost nothing. And it's because of that, because that is that connection. Besides the fact that grass are my best friends, like I love grass. Grass and I, so I can understand the clover. Grass and I are like buddies. That's my recharge of all recharges. I did a
That
whole
is actually grass is the most conductive of that electron charge more than
exactly.
anything else. So of course you're going to like being in grass because that's where you're going to get the most of that, whatever that is.
Exactly. And I just did a whole episode on grass, on the relationship with grass, because there are so many aspects to life that help us, that we can understand better when we think about ourselves in that connection with grass, both physically, what we get out of it, everything you just mentioned relating to the earthing process and the electron charge and all those pieces, but also the fact that, grass is about being trampled on. It's about mixing it up. It's always about community. I mean, there's just so many elements, and so that pulls into it. Do you find that once you have the idea, like once you start with developing the project and whatever idea that you have into place, do you feel like there's also moments that you bring, that you find yourself kind of saying, oh no, I need to go consult
Yeah.
with the tree, or with clover, or with whomever it is that's around? And second question, that's kind of a second part of it, is once you start filming, or once you start the production of it, how do you bring that to the others that are working with you? Because I could imagine that you have this deep connection, and I'm sure, just based on talking to you, that you transmit it in so many ways. But is there you want everyone that's working on the project to really feel that connection for themselves in their own way and to develop it. Is that something that you encourage as a culture for the production team? Is it something that you ask them to do or maybe guide them to do as part of the process?
Being an environmental documentary filmmaker, I would say we're not the highest paying and we don't have the largest budgets. So, in that sense, we've had the benefit of attracting people who are like minded
Mm,
because we can't always pay the top rate for the best person,
right,
but maybe somebody who's really talented is willing to work for less because they believe in the message of the project. So we naturally attract people into our team that 100% are on board. And sometimes we've had people that just, they're talented, but and they're like, okay, yeah, I'll do a good thing, but they don't really believe it or know much about it or have had much experience with it. And usually during the process, it's an opening for them.
right.
Usually when they get into this and they're with us and they're on interviews and they're listening and they're in these spaces, everything happens for a reason. And we attract just the right people who are ready for exactly this message at this moment. And so not everyone comes to us with a lot of knowledge around this, but certainly everyone who's worked on these projects has been deeply touched in major ways and have had, like me, their eyes opened over and over and over again about all of this wisdom that's out there that has to do with healing and nature and the earth and climate and how it's all connected. And ultimately, people who work with us, their diets improve. They stop eating foods that are chemically doused. They get an understanding of how nutrition works. They start to take better care of their health. People who maybe thought like earthing was a woo woo practice, now they're like, on set without their shoes on.
Right.
So, if they don't come to us with that love per se in the beginning, maybe there was something that brought them to us that, this was the message for them at this time. And I,
And
and
this
everything.
is this is what I think we all need. We need to experience these things in our own way, right? For them, they're experiencing it through a love of filmmaking, right? Which is why they're working in this industry, why they're doing these types of things. And so that opens, you're already kind of in your environment from that perspective, pardon the pun. And so therefore you're a little bit more open. And so you can hear that message more clearly. And not just the message that comes from the film itself, right? From making that film, but also the message that you are transmitting, that is kind of piggybacking on, that's coming from that tree, coming from clover, coming from that experience. I feel like these are the important aspects of how we unite people. We don't do it by telling them to do something. We do it by allowing them to do it and feel it themselves. And then from there, as you just said, I also had the same experience in my own work, and also with many of my clients. Like, your diet naturally starts to change, your process, like the products you buy, you start looking at things going, wait a minute, would I? No, 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 I don't need that. Even your needs change, which I find also a really interesting one. It's hard to explain to people that how much a deep connection with the natural world changes you, in the sense of, I don't have to go tell somebody, don't buy plastic, or don't perpetuate this, or don't overeat, even, because you just naturally don't do it. There's a shift that happens in the way that you experience the world, and therefore it's not necessary.
Mhm.
I kind of want to go forward, and then I'm going to go backwards, and then I'm going to go sideways. So try to follow for a second, because I have like three trains of thought that are coming in different perspectives. One of them is relating to going forward, which is, I'm curious. Okay, so I started working closely with plants in around 2012 ish, was when my plant reawakening and the work that I started doing kind of started to come up in that perspective. And then in my work, I've had the privilege of being, because I have a master's in vegetal future with plants, which is plant social innovation and design with Stefano Mancuso. I went back to the birth of plant neurobiology, to when we first, in about 2006, started to contemplate and discuss more openly in the scientific world the intelligence of the plant world. and many of these principles that we're going. And it's been very interesting to watch a parallel progression between things that have magically been done here in Damanhur with the reconnection with the plant world, which is one of our missions. And we have an entire tree orienting project that is to help rebuild the kind of energetic mycelial networks that have been cut off by human deforestation and soil problems and all these different aspects, and to reconnect this vast network of vegetal intelligence back also into the human world, so that this kind of mix. So I've kind of been looking at these paths that are all sort of supposedly happening parallel, and watching how in the last probably about 10 years especially, there's been this, at least from my point of view, quickening, this acceleration of much more understanding of the science behind things, a lot more acceptance. I mean, there's still a raging debate around plant consciousness and human neurobiologists who can't accept that there's a consciousness outside of the brain, but that we're not even going to get into probably. But I'm curious as to if in the work that you're seeing, also with your contributions and the films that you're doing and such, do you see that kind of quickening? Like, are you seeing that people are starting to more easily accept it? Do we see the climate conversation changing to being not so much about like you know, doom gloom, and it's all about like this aspect of carbon as resource, but more of like, hey, our planet is this living, breathing, sentient being with all these other sentient beings on it, including all the plants that are there. And what the hell are we doing? Like, are you seeing the conversation shift?
Mhm. So I'll give you two great examples. Um, One is right before the Thomas Fire here in California in 2017. We uploaded the short version of the Earthing movie onto different social media platforms as we were racing to evacuate. And then we had to kind of disappear for a couple of months because we couldn't come home. So we ended up in Australia. And we went to this like obscure place in the middle of nowhere to this yoga class. And the teacher at the beginning of class started talking about this short film that she had just seen on Facebook. And I remember we were laying there on the yoga mat just thinking, okay, this is cool. And she's like, no, but it's about earthing. And I remember thinking, oh, that's funny. Somebody else made a movie about earthing too. Like they can see it or whatever, like 100 Monkey Theory. And then she starts to go on. And then all of a sudden, I realized it was my film. And I was like, how in the world did she see it? And then we were like, wait, where did you see this? Like, we made that film. And she did not believe us at all. She thought we were like totally cuckoo. It had been viewed over 120 million times, and we had done nothing. Nothing. It's been viewed, the full length has been viewed over 8 million times on YouTube. We've done nothing to promote that. So that's an example of putting something out there, having no expectation whatsoever, and then watch. I mean, people come up to me all the time, and I think that they're going to say something about Kiss the Ground or about Prancer. But usually, the people that are the most touching and moved are those people who come up to me and they say, I watched the Earthing movie and your story changed my life. And because of you, and then fill in a story about
Oh,
healing
well,
my mother, my father, myself, my sister, my child. It's just amazing how that works. You know, it's not from me. It's like through whatever, you know, when I lay down and I'm at the mercy of nature and I'm trying to clear my mind, the words that I say are use me. Use me. I am your servant. Use me. And as a child, the message I got from the trees was, you are here to tell a powerful story about the earth that will vibrate through the planet. I knew that. That was the message I got from the trees. And so it put me on this life path. And it's been so mysterious, you know, how
mhm.
I got here and all the things, but it has me have so much acceptance for all of it. The second thing is with the organic movement in the United States. It took over 25 years to get to about 3 million acres into organic agriculture. Since Kiss the Ground came out in 2020, over 70 million acres in the United States are now in transition to regeneration. The USDA, the entire USDA, watched Kiss the Ground. They formed a committee in Congress that watched Kiss the Ground. They then said, amongst other things, that Kiss the Ground was one of the main catalysts that had them allocate $20 billion to climate smart agriculture. We got a phone call from King Charles's assistant showing up at our house, asking us to go visit with him. We went to visit with King Charles. He's like, Kiss the Ground's my favorite movie. My assistants are so annoyed. because I've shared it with over 1,000 people and they want me to stop talking about it, and I had a whole expectation of what that was going to be like and was shocked to learn that King Charles feels that his job, and like, he believes in sacred geometry. He feels that
Hmm?
it's his role in life to promote regeneration, that that's his calling from God. Like, that came as a real shock. Um, just that truly this message came through. People are using it in the way that it was meant to be used. And I think ultimately, this work is all about being of service and letting the message come through. And absolutely, when that happens, when it's genuine and authentic, people feel that and they latch onto it and they take it and they own it for themselves and they share that with others, and it has a tremendous impact. Um, I can't say the same is true for all of the ideas that I've had that I've tried to push through.
I love that. I love it. I feel the same way. Trust me, I have a few different plant business partners, including Noelle over here, who's hiding in the corner, who's a Christmas cactus. And a lot of my best work was co-created with my previous business partner, which was Spider Plant. And Gary the Silver Fir is always telling me, do this and do that. So I totally understand. Like, and that's it, because that's the message, right? There's a resonance that comes from the earth, that comes from earth directly, that and comes through those different beings, because it's a united message. It's a message that does speak to kind of the needs and fills a gap, and it's a message filled with hope. This is what I try to explain to people over and over again, which is, what is the biggest change when you recognize yourself as a being of nature? It's the fact that fear, that underlying fear, that hum of fear that most people live with, that goes away, because that fear is based on the fear of separation, the fear that I'm no longer able to deal with the planet. I don't know how to feed myself. I don't know how to do all these types of things. That low level disconnection of that original trauma just
Mhm.
goes away. It starts to dissipate totally. It doesn't mean you become overnight like a woods guide or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is that you start to feel your relationships, your connections, you feel your connection back to earth, you feel your connection to others. Like, it just changes the way that you approach life, because you're doing it from a connected state.
And that's it. I think that's also the difference between, like, my ideas, like my ideas, I want to control, I want them to win, I want them to be right. There's a fear under it, like you just said. The stuff that comes through, just total confidence and knowing. It's like the
Right,
intuition is so strong. It's like, well, this isn't me, so I'm just going to be of service to whatever this is. Like all the other people right now who are being called to do the same thing or to be the
right.
same way. I mean, I don't even think I'm that unique in this. I just happen to have, I hear the messages that I hear that are coming through and I'm taking action on. But I think that anywhere where you see these massive breakthroughs, there's got to be, in my opinion, some kind of like intuition or knowledge coming through. Um, yeah. And sometimes I don't understand it. And sometimes it doesn't match my view of how it should be. But that's all in the trusting of the universe, right?
Yeah, and like you said, I do think that as more and more people, these defenses come down, as more and more people are getting outside and experiencing nature in their own way, whether that's a city tree or a house plant, or whether that's going to a city park or going out into the bush somewhere, it doesn't really matter. But as you start to do this, those defenses come down. And as more and more science helps us understand the intelligence of plants, I think more and more people are open to allowing the message to come through. I The other piece that I think is another big element, which I'm glad that you're talking about it in the terms that you're saying it, is that for many people, the idea of plant communication or of communication with the natural world, animal communication, nature communication, is words. Like, oh, I don't hear them. And so if I don't hear it, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. It's way more than that. It's that spidey sense sometimes. It's that feeling. It's the good idea that comes through, that
Mhm.
you're like, where the hell did that come from? And then you look around and you lock eyes with some plant or some being, whatever, whomever, and you're like, oh my goodness, that came from you. Like, now I get it. I understand. And it just arrived in a way. It came in a dream. It came in an emotion. It came in a memory that you cooked into something else. I try to tell people. I did an expanded plant communication workshop not so long ago, a few months back, and I had a woman in there who at the end revealed that she was an animal communicator. And I was like, oh, cool, super cool. I'm like, how did you enjoy the class? She's like, I have to admit, I came here thinking, because I wanted to try something new, I thought it was going to be like most like most of the classes that I've taken. You drop into your heart space and listen. And she is like, you just blew my mind, because I work a lot with art and I tap into movement and body and other emotions and all these colors and all kinds of different aspects, because I find that the natural world communicates in many, many, many different ways. And part of this is about allowing ourselves to trust ourselves enough to let that come in. It's not that they're not communicating. Kin are there all the time. It's
Yes.
us that we don't trust ourselves. And this is where I think your films are so important, because during one of the recent like No Kings protests, I heard an interesting sociological statistic that they were talking about. They were saying that the importance of these kinds of protests beyond the protest itself is the fact that when more and more people see others doing something that they think they're the only ones that do it, they're more likely then to continue to do it, and more importantly to gather with others to do it. So if I think that this plant over here is talking to me, and I think that that's a little woo because nobody around me talks about plant communication, then I'm like going to ignore what I'm receiving from that plant because I don't believe it's real. And so I think that that's another element of your kinds of films, of these types of, not just the message, the scientific message, which, I could give you praise about all of that, but you've received all of that praise. I think there's another element that is not to undervalue, which is giving, and I think sharing this part of your story, how they come, is about saying to yourself, you know what, this is really about connection. And look, there's more of us that do it. You don't have to be kind of woo and, I mean, although I am woo and weird, but I mean, you don't have to be that kind of woo that you're like staring off into the clouds doing Ouija boards and like talking to the dead in order for you to also be a plant or an animal communicator. You could be a PhD student. You could be somebody who works in a factory, anybody. It's not a woo thing. It's a natural capability that we all have. And that when we tap into it, we now start to flow and co-create with this
Mhm.
planet.
100%. That's
Yeah.
how it works.
That's how it works. So here's my other question. You have another film, which is Be Wild, which
Mhm.
wildness is another huge topic for me that I think is so important and so connected to this natural movement. Can you tell people a little bit more about what Be Wild is about?
Be Wild is a new film that we've made that's about protecting pollinators and biodiversity. And, we need those pollinators. We need that biodiversity. People think that the honeybee, is the only bee, but there's actually over 20,000 different types of bees, and most of them are non-stinging. And each plant co-evolved, each pollinating plant co-evolved with a specific type of bee
Mhm.
that works together. They're attracted to the color, they're attracted to, like, they literally work together. And when we've been colonizing bees by having the honeybee basically industrialized. And the problem with that is that they compete for resources with the native bees, and then the native bees begin to get wiped out. And also, bees are thriving way more in cities now because of the lack of pesticides and herbicides that are being sprayed. Because in farms, especially here in the US and all around the world, actually, it's been banned in the UK, but neonicotinoids are a very toxic um, pesticide that kills bees, and it's like nicotine, so they are addicted to it, but then it causes them to be incapable of returning home. They get super dizzy, and then they basically keel over and die. And so 1 teaspoon of a neonicotinoid can wipe out, I think it was 2.5 billion bees. I think it was something like a couple of gallons of this stuff could wipe out the whole planet. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was insane how toxic some of these chemicals are, and how we need these biodiverse pollinators. We need the native pollinators in order to be able to continue to grow the foods that we eat. And without them, with the extinction of bees, which is what's currently happening, we're going to see that food can't be produced at scale. And so it affects all of us. Our well being depends on the well being of these little creatures, most of which are like female bees out there working really hard for us every single day. And the film is really just a love letter to them. And it really shows like how hard they work for us and the beauty of the biodiversity that they have and all of the people who are out there fighting to protect and save them and how that's happening all around the world. And I, in the process, became a beekeeper, and then I lost bees, and then I did it again, and then I lost them. And I've just been planting, pollinating plants everywhere. And so now I don't see the honeybees as much. Now, I mean, I do have honeybees, but it's very limited. Now I'm looking for what are the native bees that I'm seeing here, and like I didn't even notice them before. I
Mhm.
had no idea. They're like little, they stick to certain plants. Um, yeah, it's a love of biodiversity and a love of protecting those wild spaces where they can thrive.
And a love of relationship, because I think you said something that I feel like most people still don't understand, which is that each bee, creates this relationship with a small, sometimes just one species, right? They make that match with one species, sometimes a few different species, but it's still a very small number. And
Yep.
so therefore it is to save the bees, it means also to save the plants. It's about saving that relationship. It really is not just a love story to them, but also a love story between them between the bees and these plants who created. I myself, I was gifted two plants last year, and I have a very small balcony here that has, basically all the rescues that that I put outside, and they just bloomed. And so there's all these different bees like that have never really come up to this space because I've never had that kind of flowering plant during this autumn time, right? This kind of bee that's still here looking at winter. And I'm just so happy that they have this nourishment and they have this food. And I think that it's important because when we talk, I feel like sometimes there's this disconnect that happens in people's minds where it's like, okay, we want to talk about protecting the bees, and then we talk about the chemicals, but the chemicals are going on the plants. And so it really is at the same level of protecting and taking care of the plants who don't need these freaking chemicals to begin with when, grown, as you know better than I do, in a way that's like, folks, if you need that many chemicals, you're growing it wrong, right? Or there are other alternatives. For example, there's this, I don't know if you know this, there's a wonderful French company called Genotic. Have you ever heard of them? They make a musical fertilizer, like a musical pesticide, excuse me. They make music that is specifically tuned to whatever it is that that plant needs, that is the natural kind of killer, or the whatever will deter whatever it is that's ravishing them. So they work a lot for organic farms or organic vineyards and farms that cannot spray and should not spray. And therefore,
Mhm.
when they do have a large infestation, they come to this company who creates music that literally will act like a pesticide for those plants.
Wow. Well, I mean, that there's so many ways that we can help nature to get back into balance from us pushing it off balance.
Right.
And nature has the answers within it. I mean, we think that we need to go in and intervene, but the reality is, it's like, if you have a pest problem, that's actually a helpful clue as to what's going on in your ecosystem. It's like, okay, well, what's happening here? Like, what are we missing? Do we have a lack of biodiversity? Do we have a lack of predators? Maybe we're farming not in context. Maybe, like there's 6 principles to regenerative agriculture that work anywhere in the world. And when you follow those 6 principles, nature can restore and go back into balance and heal. And it's ubiquitous. It doesn't matter where you are. And so I think it just takes creativity versus the urge to control. I think that's the difference. And one other little thing about bees that I learned that was so amazing, the reason that our food has color and flavor is because of the insects that they co-evolved with. And then
Mm.
when you start to see those same foods or plants grown without that symbiosis. You see a lackluster in color. You see a loss of flavor. It starts to feel not like the thing that it was.
Right.
It becomes very generic, and the color and the flavor and all of it starts to become diminished as it loses the nutrition that it needs. And yeah, so I have a whole new appreciation for the way that nature is self-correcting. We think that we have, it's like when I gave birth to my children, it was a high risk labor after I was exposed to tons of chemicals during the film I made about the BP oil spill. And I was a high risk pregnancy and I was hooked up to all these things. And I went to the hospital to give birth and I had like my whole pregnancy plan. And I was like all the way into it. But then they finally kicked me out of the hospital because I was taking too long. They're like, "You're not in labor." I was like, "But I am in labor." They're like, "No, you're not in labor." So I had to leave the hospital. They made us leave at 4 a.m. And I was you can only imagine, I'm so angry. I'm in labor. They're making me leave the hospital. And we drove home. Josh fell asleep driving home. Anyway, we got here. You can imagine how that went over with me. We got home. I gave birth at home. And it was the best thing
Perfect.
ever because my body knew exactly what to do. That was where I was meant to give birth. And I ended up giving birth to my son at home too, totally naturally. And I think the reason I'm sharing this is because I gained through that a whole new respect for intervention.
Mhm.
Because I feel like, the masculine energy wants to protect the feminine. That's the sort of the nature of what's called, and that masculine is to hold and protect the feminine. And so if we're like in pain and there's this thing called birth, and there's this thing that's very wild and out of control happening to our bodies, I can understand the thinking of wanting to make it easier, to make it something that's more predictable, make it something that can be controlled. I can understand that out of this wanting to protect. And I almost feel like that's where we're at with nature, that need and that want to control, because the unpredictability of this wildness that can come through. So I respect it. I understand why we do it, because and maybe that's not true for the chemical companies, but I think, for my dad and for my family, when they started to use chemicals, it was because, it's when you're growing food, you're at the mercy of nature and your life depends on it, and your children's lives depend on it, and your community depends on it. You're at the mercy of what happens that year with nature. And so I can understand that urge to intervene and to try to make it predictable and safe. But I think the beauty in all of this is being willing to let go and to allow for it to be wild, to allow for us to be in our natural state, and for it to be unpredictable, and for us to be okay with that, to experience the messiness of life and birth and death, and to surrender that control. And I think that that's where we're at right now in the world. We're at our breaking point. You've tried to control for so long. And a lot of that has to do with women's bodies. And we're talking about for centuries, of disempowering women, of controlling women. And as we have disempowered and controlled women, we have disempowered nature. And it goes hand in hand. And when women become empowered, nature thrives. And that's been
Mm.
proven over and over and over again. So I have empathy for everyone who, including my own family, who have tried to suppress the fear of the unpredictability of how chaotic and messy it can be. But I'm excited to be entering into this new wild phase of regeneration where nature is in control and we allow for her to be. And we start to observe versus trying to fix. And we start to listen for the clues versus viewing them as a threat. It's like, why is this pest here? Why is this not growing well here? It's like the best farmers sit and watch and listen. Like, I have chickens and peacocks and a llama. My favorite thing to do is to just sit and watch them. I just watch it and I learned so much about them. And at first, I didn't even know why I did that. I had no idea, but I didn't realize that actually that's number one rule of regenerative farming: sit, observe. That's how you learn. That's how you learn about your environment. And I think we all intuitively want to follow those regenerative principles. It's in all of us. That wisdom is in all of us. It's innate. And if you sit in a patch of clover in the grass or you hug the mama tree, I think those are the messages that come through.
I feel like I willed you my question. Like I telepathically sent it because I was about to ask you about the wildness piece and you just went into it beautifully, which is exactly how I feel about it. I mean, I again, it's another episode I did all about because this wildness component, this being out of control, so much of it is because of this lack of trust we have for the relationship we have with nature. We're
Mhm,
so disconnected from the cycles. We're so disconnected, unfortunately, from, what are our natural rhythms that we don't understand all these pieces. And, mentioning all of these different elements relating to how that control, which is again that low level hum of fear that we were talking about earlier,
mhm,
right? That fear that something is going to go wrong in the harvest and that I won't be able to have it, and that this is a unnatural. So I try to it's an unnatural thing if I try to control it and do it the way that I want it done because I've built a life on a house on a deck of cards. Like I've
mhm,
literally built it in a way that any one little piece that falls apart, then the whole thing falls apart. And I end up not being able to take care of myself. We don't have the community connections to be able to support each other anymore. We
mhm,
don't have like an understanding of what the cycles to be able to read the signs of what's going to happen and how is that going to happen. So the farther we get from that connection, the more we give in to that fear, the more we try to control. And you said it perfectly, which is there's a beautiful paper. It was one of the first papers I reviewed when I was doing plant consciousness commentary, was called The Feminist Plant. And it was all about the water lily and how the parallels that you just mentioned between controlling women and controlling the beauty of flowers and certain kinds of plants. In this
mhm,
case, they were using the water lily as an example of this, beautifully strong plant that holds an entire environment underneath and yet is considered delicate and we can't trust and we can't, and yet you can step on a water lily and still be held in certain pieces. And how this started to show that fact of, it was like one example of how we can understand why it is that we are trying to control women because we also can't control nature. It's like another force of nature that women are that we can't control. So we do what we've done to nature, which is try to hold that down and restrict it. We see it in the body and the clothing that women have historically had to wear. The rules of etiquette that were created are all around control. And it's fascinating. I was taking I'm a Kabbalist, as well as many other things, and I was taking this wonderful class from a person who studies kind of the original translation of certain texts, and he goes off in a really interesting way about how the misunderstanding of women or of the role of the feminine, all because a bunch of men were the ones that were the first translators and were like the feminine power. They didn't want to recognize it within themselves, much less give it an external representation of a whole, because oh no, we can't do that. And it's a fascinating parallel that connects, which is why we have the ecofeminism movement, right? We have ecofeminism for a reason. It helps us understand a lot of these different parts. So there's just so many elements of that I'm like, yes, yes, yes to what you said. Yes, yes, and yes, yes. And that control is just so scary for people. It's so, and that wildness within us. Now, we even as individuals and especially as women have learned not to trust it either. And so we also now suppress it. We self suppress our own wildness. We self suppress that part of us that taps into nature, that understands the cycles, that understands our own bodily cycles. We
mhm,
try to control it with all these different pieces. You mentioned another element that I just want to kind of highlight because I'm so glad you did, which is that observation piece. My
mhm,
master's thesis, my master's project was all based on Madeira, which is the one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It's one of like two of the most of the oldest. It's a troglodyte culture, so there's still the caves that people lived in originally. And for the part of this project, we built a relationship to nature that the original kind of cavemen and cave women, cave people had, which was based on three main elements. The element of like the out, the thing that I go to, whether it's farming in their case or some kind of foraging or anything, it's the thing I go out to. And then there is the thing that I keep nearby, which was the small scale agriculture, the agriculture of the things that I eat, the herbs that I use for medicine or for food, like the rosemaries and all of those types of pieces. And then the most important part that I discovered in this is the pensile garden, the garden that is I sit in the courtyard that connects our caves together, and I observe nature. And so it is about awe and wonder and reflection and beauty. And these three elements were extremely important for that culture. And
Mm.
it took me down a rabbit hole of understanding that, that is also the way the hunter gatherer culture lived. Hunter gatherers, they worked for like a very short period of time, maybe a week, and then they spent the next 3 weeks in contemplation with the nature around them, which is
Mm.
how they knew the nature so well to know where to go for food. So they didn't have those fears that we have. They knew where everything was, where every being that they needed, whether it was a plant or an animal, was, because they sat in contemplation and observation. They listened to the land in that way. And when they started moving into caves, they still had to have that element of reflection and contemplation. And again, another element we don't talk about enough. We think about it as like, I'm gonna go to India for a like, or I'm gonna do Vipassana, but it's like, no, that needs to be a part of your everyday life.
Mm.
Sitting and just staring off into nature in reflection, observing. We used to have the nucleo I used to live in, which is our shared houses, had chickens, and I used to often do that too. Would go up to the chickens and just sit by and just watch and observe, or sit like right in front of my cabin and like just look out. And now I have this beautiful. I sit in front of a window, so my lighting is always weird, and I have a bunch of plant partners that are all sitting around me. I know so many little nuances of how they change, how kin change, how the landscape changes, because I sit here sometimes, and just observe. And it's so rewarding, isn't it? It's like it just gives you so much back.
It does. It's nourishing to your soul. It's reconnecting and remembering that innate wisdom that we all have within us. It's like being open to receiving the messages that are wanting to come through,
Yes.
and allowing that reverence and respect for all beings that we're connected to also have their own wisdom and to learn from that.
I love that. I think that's just so perfect. Rebecca, as we start to wrap well, probably close to the end of this, is there anything else you want to share? Because I am thrilled, beyond thrilled, and it's to me further proof that, as I watch your work and I feel the difference between the type of work you do, and now that I've had this conversation with you, I understand why it feels different. And I hope that
Mm.
everybody who listens to this can feel that difference, where again, we're not coming at it from, yes, there's numbers, yes, there are statistics and scientific studies to read and study and know, but it's more than that. And I think that that's what people really feel in the films that you do, and why something like Earthing gets 8 million views is because of that, because that is what is coming through. And it's so easy. Put your feet on the ground. Just put your feet on the
Yes.
ground. Like, not making this hard for you. Just walk out of your house and put your feet on the ground.
Okay, I will. Come with me. Hold on. Here, come see my mama tree. That's what needs to happen. Hold on a second. This is where I go to observe. There's my chicken coop over there with all my chickens.
Nice.
This is my clover.
There you
Oh, this is not a
are.
good example of clover. Here's a good example of clover. Here we go. Clover
I love it.
tree.
And there's the mama tree. Hi. And that's it.
Let
And
me
that's
take my.
it.
That's it. Yeah, this is where all the magic happens.
I love it. I love it. And with
Thank
that, any last words you want to share with everyone?
Oh, just, we're all in this together. We are all connected. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, none of this is probably news, you're probably in this world, but, you know, just remember to share this gift with as many people as you can, and I feel like the films I make, that's one vehicle to do it, watch the Earthing movie and kiss the ground and be wild. But more than anything, just put your feet on the ground and listen. I think that's the message that's coming through.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been amazing. And I am so grateful for your presence, for your work, for the message that you put out, and for the fact that you are living that. You are a living embodiment of exactly what you speak about and what you share in your work. And thank you for that.
Thank you with all my heart. Come visit me at Big Picture Ranch. We'll go harvest some eggs and make breakfast together.
Yes, let's go do it. Let's do it. What I loved most about this conversation with Rebecca is that it reminds us that the earth is not asking for us to be perfect. She's asking for us to be present. She doesn't need us to save her. She's inviting us to remember that we are part of the regeneration. That every small act of listening, every time we pause, breathe, touch a leaf, or simply notice, we are participating in the healing that brings us together again. This is where reconnection begins. Not out there, but right here in the body, the breath, and in the willingness to listen again, to lay out on the clover, on the grass, on the ground, and kiss it and feel kissed by Ki. So as you move back into your day, take a moment to ask yourself, what part of Earth is trying to speak to me right now? And am I willing to listen? Pause gently and let that question linger and just allow the answers to come. And if you feel called to explore this kind of listening more deeply, not just as a moment of inspiration, but as a living practice, I invite you to join us inside the Naturally Conscious community, where our Blooming Sprouts membership is designed exactly for these kinds of explorations. You'll find workshops like the Extended Plant Consciousness workshop, and each month we gather for plant-inspired masterclass discussions that help you integrate what you hear in conversations like this into your own life, to translate inspiration into relationship and reflection into action. Because reconnecting with plant wisdom isn't just about what we know, it's about how we live. So if you've been feeling that quiet pull towards something deeper, towards belonging and coherence and the gentle intelligence of the living world, come join us. Bring your curiosity, your questions, and your heart that already knows how to listen. You'll find the link to Blooming Sprouts and the Naturally Conscious community, as always, in the show notes. And please, thank you for being a part of our growing ecosystem of reconnection. Until next time, remember, you are nature. You are listening. You are already blooming. And most importantly, remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. To continue these conversations, join us in the Naturally Conscious community, your premier online ecosystem for plant reawakening and accelerated evolution and co-creation with other kin. Here, you'll find expansive discussions, interactive courses, live events, and supportive group programs like the Plant Wisdom Book Club and the Sprouts Writing and Creativity Group. Connect with like-minded individuals collaborating with plants to integrate these insights into life. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia, and my plant collaborators. Until next time, remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. I'm out. Bye.